Hi, my name is Christina, and I am a registered dietitian and research scientist at Omega Quant, and I'm here to go over the results from your complete report. You just ordered the full fatty acid profile, so you got your results and you've seen values for 24 plus fatty acids on this piece of paper. So you might be a little confused about what this means, and that's what I'm going to try to answer in this short video. The first thing I want to note is that a majority of the fatty acid levels presented in this report are not intended yet to really guide your health decisions or suggest dietary changes. We just don't know enough about all these fatty acids to be able to make really strong recommendations yet. With the exception of the trans fat index and of course the omega-3 index, all the other fatty acid levels are part of a new and emerging field of science where we are still determining what they mean for our health and how we change them to benefit our health. So it should be said, before you make any decisions or any changes to your diet based on these fatty acid levels, please consult your healthcare provider and talk to them about these results. So let's go into some of the interesting things you can learn from this report. First, we think that it is incredibly interesting to see an overall pattern of your fatty acids in your blood. And these fatty acids that we've measured and are providing here in the complete report are a measure of fatty acids in your whole blood. You provided a dried blood spot for the sample, and we look at the fatty acids in the whole blood. So that includes plasma, white, and red blood cells. But you might be thinking the omega-3 index, I've heard, is just in red blood cells. You are correct. So we are able to, from the dried blood spot, we are able to use a proprietary algorithm that can predict the amount of EPA and DHA from a dried blood spot to a red blood cell with about 98% accuracy. So we're able to estimate the true red blood cell level for the omega-3 index from a dried blood spot. You might notice that your EPA and DHA levels reported here will not add up to the omega-3 index, and that is because we are providing the omega-3 index as the red blood cell estimate, and we're providing the EPA and DHA levels as the actual whole blood estimates. Some of these fatty acids are affected by diet and some are affected by our body, and our body can make a lot of these fatty acids. And so it's important to remember that this is a new science, and every single fatty acid in your body is not a direct relation to your diet. The omega-3 index and trans fat index are two unique fatty acids in that they are so closely connected to diet. Pretty much the rest of them, metabolism plays a huge role in how much is in your red blood cell or whole blood spot. In your report, you get an overview of each of the 5 fatty acid groups. We have omega-3 fatty acids, omega-6 fatty acids, cis monounsaturated fatty acids, saturated fatty acids, and trans fatty acids. And so we've talked a lot about the omega-3 fatty acids in the omega-3 basic video. The omega-6 fatty acids, there are a couple of interesting ones that we are focused on that I can highlight. The first is linoleic acid. And this is the parent essential omega-6 fatty acid that is in a lot of our oils. It's in safflower oil and sunflower oil, and also in nuts and seeds. So you can get linoleic acid from more unhealthy sources like in processed foods, or you can get it from healthier sources like nuts and seeds. Blood levels of linoleic acid are a bit controversial because we've seen recently in several different large studies that higher levels of linoleic acid actually predict better outcomes for heart health and diabetes. And so with that information, it doesn't work well with the idea that all omega-6s are bad. And so this is where we think looking at the whole profile and having all the fatty acids really gives us an advantage, because we can identify maybe a certain omega-6 fatty acid is worse than another omega-6 fatty acid. Each individual fatty acid plays a role in the body, is there for a reason, and shouldn't necessarily be considered good or bad, with the exception of trans fats. Those are probably just bad and can go away. Another important fatty acid that we are interested in is called palmitic acid, and this is a saturated fat, and it is found in palm oil, and it's very common in the diet. But what's interesting about palmitic acid is that if you eat a lot of palm oil or saturated fats, your palmitic acid levels do not increase. It is not the same relationship as the omega-3s. So with the palmitic acid, we've seen that if you have a high diet in carbohydrates, where you have excessive carbohydrates, you actually get more of these shorter chain saturated and monounsaturated fatty acids. So your body takes the extra carbons from the carbohydrates and makes fat out of it to store for later, and typically does that. And the types of fatty acids that it makes are called de novo lipogenesis fatty acids, and it's your lower chain, like 16 and 18 chain carbon fatty acids. So that group of fatty acids, including palmitic acid, we think is really interesting because it kind of is identifying a dietary pattern. And palmitic acid also, blood levels have been shown to be related to diabetes in large studies as well. So having higher levels of that fatty acid is related to higher incidence of diabetes. Still, we don't have enough information on this fatty acid to make really specific dietary recommendations, but it's an interesting fatty acid that in the future might help us understand that metabolism a little bit better. Saturated fatty acids in your red blood cell membrane are not related to saturated fat that you consume. So typically we think of saturated fat as increasing bad fats in our blood, and that's really talking about LDL cholesterol. And LDL cholesterol is a completely different type of fat measurement from our body. We're looking at a pattern of specific types of fatty acids and not the amount of fat in your or cholesterol in your bloodstream. And so often we get questions where people are worried that their saturated fat percentages are really high, and it does not have any indication whatsoever, any relation to the saturated fat LDL story. So you don't need to worry so much in that vein about the saturated fatty acid levels in your dried blood spots.